The dusty shoebox fell from my trembling hands, scattering yellowed letters across the attic floor like autumn leaves. As I knelt among the scattered papers, one envelope caught my eye. My sister Antonia's distinctive handwriting addressing my dearest Carlos. My Carlos, my husband, of 43 years. The letter was dated just 2 months after our wedding, and as I unfolded the delicate paper with shaking fingers, the words burned into my vision. Our secret is safe, my love. She suspects nothing about us. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. And she certainly doesn't know the truth about little Spencer. Spencer, my nephew, Antonia's son, the boy I'd helped raise, the young man I'd loved like my own child. The boy who had Carlos's exact same eyes, the same stubborn cowlick, the same crooked smile I'd attributed to family resemblance. My entire marriage had been built on a lie, and the child I'd treasured as my nephew was actually my husband's son. I'm Martha Fitz, 71 years old, and until that moment in my dusty attic, I thought I knew the story of my life. I thought I understood my family, my marriage, my place in the world. I was wrong about everything. Let me start from the beginning, because context matters when your entire existence gets rewritten in a single afternoon. I married Carlos Rudd in 1981, when I was 28 and he was 31. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. We'd known each other for 3 years, having met at the insurance company where we both worked. He was an adjuster, I was in underwriting. Our courtship was steady, practical, built on shared values and compatible life goals rather than passion that burned hot and fast. Carlos was handsome in an understated way, dark hair that he kept meticulously combed, warm brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, a kind smile that made clients trust him instantly. He was reliable, honest, the kind of man who showed up when he said he would, and meant what he said. My parents adored him. My friends envied me. I felt lucky to have found someone so fundamentally decent in a world that often felt chaotic and uncertain. My sister Antonia was 3 years younger than me, and in every way my opposite. Where I was cautious, she was impulsive. Where I planned carefully, she leaped without looking. She was stunning, the kind of beautiful that made people stop mid-sentence when she walked into a room. Long dark hair that caught light like silk, a figure that made other women quietly check their own appearance, and a laugh that could charm anyone within hearing distance. Antonia had always been the wild child of our family. She'd dropped out of college twice, traveled across Europe with money she'd saved working at a series of temporary jobs, dated men our parents disapproved of, and generally lived life as if consequences were suggestions rather than realities. She was magnetic, unpredictable, and exhausting to love. When I announced my engagement to Carlos, Antonia had been living in California, trying to make it as an actress. She came home for the wedding, of course, playing the role of supportive sister with enthusiasm that seemed genuine. She helped me pick flowers, offered opinions on invitation designs, and threw me a bachelorette party that was tasteful enough for my conservative friends, but fun enough to feel like a real celebration. Carlos and Antonia got along well, maybe too well, I realize now. They shared a sense of humor that sometimes left me feeling like the responsible older sister rather than the bride-to-be. They would joke about my careful planning, my detailed lists, my need to have everything organized and scheduled. It was affectionate teasing, or so I thought. Now I wonder if there was something else underneath those shared glances and inside jokes. Our wedding was everything I'd dreamed of. Small, elegant, held in the garden behind my parents' Victorian house in Salem, Oregon. Antonia was my maid of honor, radiant in dusty rose silk that complemented her coloring perfectly. She gave a speech that made everyone cry, about love, commitment, and the joy of seeing her responsible older sister finally let someone take care of her for a change. 3 months after the wedding, Antonia announced she was pregnant. She was single, unemployed, and had been living paycheck to paycheck even before the pregnancy. She came home to Oregon, and naturally Carlos and I offered to help however we could. The father, she explained, was an actor she'd been seeing casually. He'd moved to New York when he learned about the pregnancy, making it clear he wanted no part of parenthood. Antonia was devastated, but determined to raise the baby on her own. Looking back, I'm amazed by how thoroughly I believed every word of that story. But why wouldn't I? Antonia had always been honest about her complicated love life, and the timeline seemed reasonable. She'd been in California during my wedding, and the months afterward. The pregnancy explained why she'd seemed tired and emotional during what should have been a happy time. Carlos was wonderfully supportive throughout Antonia's pregnancy. He drove her to doctor's appointments when her old car broke down, helped me paint the nursery we set up in our spare bedroom for visits, and spent hours assembling the crib we'd bought as our contribution to baby preparations. He seemed genuinely excited about becoming an uncle, talking about teaching the baby to fish and play baseball, planning camping trips and family vacations that would include Antonia and her child. When Spencer was born, Carlos was more emotional than I'd ever seen him. He held that tiny baby with such tenderness, such complete devotion, that I fell in love with my husband all over again. Here was a man who would love children that weren't even his own, who understood that family meant showing up and caring regardless of biology. Antonia moved back to Portland when Spencer was 6 months old, finding a small apartment about 20 minutes from our house. We saw them constantly, dinners twice a week, weekend outings, holidays that felt rich with the chaos and joy of extended family. Spencer called me Aunt Martha and Carlos Uncle Carlos, and we spoiled him shamelessly. As Spencer grew, the resemblance between him and Carlos became more pronounced. They had the same stubborn cowlick that refused to lie flat, the same way of tilting their heads when they were thinking, the same habit of drumming their fingers when they were impatient. Everyone commented on it. Family, friends, even strangers would remark on how much Spencer looked like his uncle. Strong family genes, we'd laugh. The Rudd men all have that look. I never questioned it. Why would I? Families share features. Genetics are funny that way. And Carlos was so natural with Spencer, so instinctively understanding of exactly what the boy needed at every stage of development. I attributed it to Carlos's innate kindness, his natural affinity for children. Now kneeling in my attic surrounded by 43 years' worth of love letters between my husband and my sister, I understood the truth that had been hiding in plain sight my entire adult life. I sat there on the dusty attic floor for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes, staring at that first letter. The paper was soft with age, the ink slightly faded, but Antonia's words were as clear as if she'd written them yesterday. "My dearest Carlos," it began, "I can't stop thinking about our weekend together while Martha was visiting her college roommate in Seattle. The way you held me, the promises we made to each other. I know this is complicated, but what we have is real. She doesn't understand you the way I do. She sees the responsible husband, the reliable provider, but I see the man underneath. The man who wants more than a predictable life with scheduled intimacy and planned conversations." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper. This was dated September 1981. Carlos and I had been married for exactly 4 months. I forced myself to pick up another letter, then another. There were dozens of them, carefully preserved in chronological order, spanning years. The early letters were passionate, full of stolen moments and careful planning to avoid detection. They wrote about meeting at hotels when I thought Carlos was working late, about phone calls made when I was at my book club, or visiting our mother. But as I read deeper into the collection, the tone shifted. The letters became more domestic, more focused on practical concerns. Antonia writing about morning sickness and fears about the pregnancy. Carlos responding with reassurances about financial support and promises that he would be there for their child, even if he couldn't be there openly. I know this isn't fair to any of us. Carlos had written in a letter dated March 1982, when Antonia would have been about 5 months pregnant with Spencer. "Martha deserves honesty, but the truth would destroy her. She's built her entire sense of self around being the responsible one, the one who makes good choices, the one who has the stable marriage. If she learned that her husband and sister have been carrying on an affair since before the wedding, it would shatter her completely. And what about the baby?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. We can give him a loving family this way, with both his parents in his life, even if the truth has to stay hidden. The letter continued. Martha will be a wonderful aunt. She already loves this baby so much, talks about him constantly, has such plans for his future. In a strange way, our deception is a gift to her. She gets to be part of his life without the complications that would come with knowing he's ours. And you're right that she's never seemed particularly interested in having children of her own. This way, she gets to experience motherhood without the full responsibility. I set that letter down with hands that felt disconnected from my body. They had discussed me like I was a character in their story, rather than a real person with my own feelings and desires. The casual dismissal of my capacity for truth, their assumption that I was better off living in ignorance, it was almost worse than the affair itself. But there was more. Letters from the late 1980s revealed that the affair had never really ended, just became more careful. Carlos and Antonia had maintained their relationship throughout Spencer's childhood, stealing time together during family gatherings, communicating through coded messages, maintaining the fiction of a brotherly concern for his nephew, while actually being a father who could never claim his son. Spencer asked me today why Uncle Carlos understands him better than any of the other adults in his life. Antonia had written in 1995, when Spencer would have been about 13. He said it's like you know what he's thinking before he says it, like you two share some special connection. I almost told him the truth right then. This secret is getting harder to keep as he gets older and more perceptive. Sometimes I think we should just confess everything, let the chips fall where they may. Carlos's response to that letter was carefully preserved in the next envelope. We've come too far to back out now. Spencer is happy, healthy, surrounded by love. Martha adores him, would do anything for him. Why would we destroy that stability for the sake of clearing our consciences? Some secrets are worth keeping if they protect the people we love. And Martha, she's happy too, isn't she? She has the marriage she wanted, the family life that fulfills her. Yes, it's built on a lie, but it's a lie that has created genuine love and connection. Sometimes the truth is overrated. I found letters from the 2000s, when Spencer was in college, where they discussed whether to tell him about his parentage before he got married and started a family of his own. They worried about genetic information he might need, about family medical histories that could be relevant for his future children. But ultimately they decided to maintain the secret, rationalizing that Spencer had never seemed curious about his biological father, and seemed content with the family structure he'd always known. The most recent letters were from just 3 years ago, when Spencer got engaged to his girlfriend Mabel. Antonia and Carlos discussed whether their son should know the truth before becoming a father himself, but again decided that the secret had been kept successfully for so long that revealing it now would only cause unnecessary pain. Martha has been such a wonderful aunt to Spencer, Carlos had written. She's helping plan his wedding, so excited about the possibility of great nieces and great nephews. She talks about how proud she is of the man he's become, how much joy he's brought to our lives. How can we tell her that the nephew she adores is actually the son of her husband and sister? It would reframe every memory, every moment of love she's felt for him. Better to let her keep her joy. I realized I was crying, not just tears, but the kind of sobbing that comes from somewhere deep in your chest, the kind that makes it hard to breathe. 43 years of marriage, 43 years of loving a child, who was my husband's son with my sister, 43 years of being the responsible, predictable wife, who supposedly didn't understand her husband's true nature. They weren't wrong about one thing: learning the truth was destroying me, exactly as Carlos had predicted it would. I don't know how long I sat in that attic, surrounded by the wreckage of my understanding of my own life. Eventually, my knees began to ache from sitting on the hard wooden floor, and the late afternoon light filtering through the small window was fading toward evening. Carlos would be home from his golf game soon, expecting dinner and pleasant conversation about our respective days. The thought of facing him, of pretending normalcy while these letters burned in my mind, made my stomach clench with nausea. But I couldn't stay in the attic forever, and I needed time to process what I'd learned, to decide what to do with this devastating knowledge. I carefully gathered all the letters, placing them back in the shoebox with trembling hands. There had to be more evidence somewhere. 43 years of deception couldn't have been maintained through letters alone. They would have found other ways to communicate, other methods of coordination. I needed to understand the full scope of their betrayal before I decided how to confront it. Carrying the shoebox down to my bedroom, I hid it in the back of my closet behind winter coats that wouldn't be needed for months. Then I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face, trying to erase the evidence of my tears. In the mirror, I looked like what I was, a 71-year-old woman who had just discovered that her entire adult life was a lie. When Carlos came home 20 minutes later, calling out his usual cheerful "Martha, I'm back," I was in the kitchen, mechanically preparing the salmon and asparagus I'd planned for dinner. My hands moved through familiar motions, while my mind reeled with questions and connections I'd never made before.
"How was your day, sweetheart?" he asked, kissing my cheek in the same casual, affectionate way he had thousands of times before. The touch that had once comforted me now felt like a betrayal in itself.
"Fine," I managed, not trusting myself to say more.
"How was golf? Good round today."
"Shot an 82, which isn't bad for an old man." He moved around the kitchen with easy familiarity, getting himself a glass of water, checking the mail I'd left on the counter.
"Did you get much done with the attic?"
The question was casual, but I found myself studying his face, looking for any sign that he knew what I might have found up there. His expression was neutral, mildly interested in the way spouses are when discussing household tasks.
"Some," I said carefully.
"Mostly just sorting through old boxes, deciding what to keep and what to donate." He nodded, attention already shifting to the evening news playing on the small television we kept on the kitchen counter. For 43 years, this had been our evening routine: dinner preparation, casual conversation about our days, the comfortable rhythm of a long marriage. Now it felt like theater, a performance I was being forced to participate in without understanding my role. During dinner, I found myself watching Carlos with new eyes, looking for signs I'd missed, clues I'd been too trusting to notice. When he mentioned that Antonia had called while I was out, something about Spencer's upcoming promotion at the engineering firm where he worked, I noticed the subtle softening of his expression when he said Spencer's name. Not Uncle Pride, I realize now, but Father Pride. "She sounded excited about it," Carlos continued. "Said Spencer's been working toward this management position for 2 years, and it finally came through. He'll be overseeing a team of 12 engineers." "That's wonderful," I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. Spencer's successes had always been a source of shared family joy. Now I understood that Carlos's investment in Spencer's career, his detailed knowledge of my nephew's professional struggles and triumphs, wasn't just the interest of a caring uncle. It was a father, following his son's life from a careful distance. After dinner, I excused myself early, claiming a headache. In our bedroom, I retrieved the shoebox and began a more systematic examination of its contents. Beyond the letters, I found small mementos that told their own story: a pressed flower from what appeared to be a significant date, ticket stubs from movies they'd seen together, a small jewelry box containing a delicate gold necklace I'd never seen Antonia wear. But it was a manila envelope at the bottom of the box that contained the most damning evidence. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, spanning years. Carlos and Antonia together in ways that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Some were clearly from the early years of their affair, both of them younger, the photos grainy with the quality of 1980s film. Others were more recent, digital prints that could have been taken within the last few years. The photographs weren't just evidence of the affair, they were documentation of a parallel life I'd never known existed. Carlos and Antonia at restaurants I didn't recognize, walking hand in hand through what appeared to be a park in Portland, embracing on a beach that definitely wasn't in Oregon. In several photos, Spencer was with them, but not as Antonia's son visiting with his uncle. In these images, they looked like a family, mother, father, and child, in configurations that had been hidden from me for decades. One photograph stopped me cold. It showed Carlos teaching a young Spencer, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, how to cast a fishing line. I remembered that day, We'd all gone to a lake about an hour outside Salem for a family picnic. I'd stayed on the shore with Antonia, preparing lunch and chatting while Carlos took Spencer to the water's edge to try fishing. I'd watched them from a distance, thinking how sweet it was that Carlos was so patient with his nephew, so natural at understanding what a young boy needed. Now, looking at this photograph that captured the same moment from a different angle, I could see what I'd missed. This wasn't an uncle teaching his nephew a new skill. This was a father sharing a tradition with his son, creating a memory that would matter to both of them in ways I'd never understood. The casual intimacy between them in the photograph, the way Spencer leaned into Carlos's guidance, the pride on both their faces, it all made terrible sense now. How many moments like this had I witnessed without understanding what I was really seeing? The next morning, I woke before dawn with a clarity that surprised me. The initial shock had given way to something harder, more focused. I needed answers, and I knew exactly where to find them. Carlos was still sleeping, his breathing deep and even beside me. For a moment, I studied his face in the dim light filtering through our bedroom curtains. At 74, he was still handsome, silver hair, weathered skin that spoke of years spent outdoors, laugh lines around his eyes. This was the face I'd woken up next to for over 4 decades, the face I'd trusted completely. I slipped out of bed quietly and made my way to his home office. Carlos had always been meticulous about record keeping, a habit from his insurance days that had carried into retirement. If there were financial traces of his double life, they would be here, carefully filed and organized in the same systematic way he approached everything else. His filing cabinet was unlocked. Why would he bother securing it from his trusting wife? I started with bank statements, looking for patterns I'd never noticed before. Carlos handled most of our finances, paying bills and managing investments, while I focused on household management and my part-time work at the local library. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Regular cash withdrawals that corresponded with dates I now recognized from the letters. Hotel charges in cities where Carlos claimed to be attending insurance industry conferences, except the hotels were expensive, romantic places rather than business conference centers. Restaurant bills for 2 when he was supposedly traveling alone. But it was a manila folder labeled Education Fund that made my hands shake again. Inside were records of payments to Portland State University, where Spencer had attended college. Tuition payments, dormitory fees, textbook allowances, all coming from an account I'd never known existed, funded by money. Carlos had quietly moved from our joint savings over the years. The pattern was methodical and extensive. Carlos hadn't just been Spencer's secret father, he'd been financially supporting his son's education while letting me believe that Antonia was struggling to make ends meet as a single mother. I remembered how proud we'd all been when Spencer received what Antonia called a partial scholarship that made college affordable. It hadn't been a scholarship at all. There were more discoveries. Life insurance policies that listed Spencer as a beneficiary, not as a nephew, but with the beneficiary amount typical of a child. Medical expenses paid directly to Spencer's doctors throughout his childhood, explaining how Antonia managed to afford quality health care on her modest income. Even a savings account that had been accumulating funds for years, labeled Spencer's future. I found receipts for gifts that Spencer had supposedly chosen for me over the years. Birthday presents, Christmas gifts, Mother's Day cards that I'd treasured as expressions of his thoughtfulness. They had all been purchased by Carlos, carefully selected to maintain the illusion of a devoted nephew, while actually being gifts from a father who couldn't publicly claim that role. The most painful discovery was a thick folder of Spencer's school reports, soccer certificates, and childhood artwork, duplicates of everything Antonia had ever shared with us, but stored in Carlos's files, as if he were the custodial parent. I realized that Carlos had been maintaining his own set of memories, his own record of his son's childhood, parallel to the version I'd been allowed to see. My hands found a subfolder labeled Medical that contained Spencer's complete health records from birth through adulthood. Not copies that an uncle might reasonably have, originals, the kind that only a parent would possess. Vaccination records, allergy information, emergency contact forms where Carlos was listed as father in handwriting. I recognized as Antonia's. I sat back in Carlos's desk chair,
overwhelmed by the scope of the deception. This wasn't just an affair that had produced a child they'd hidden from me. This was an entire parallel family structure, complete with financial planning, shared parenting responsibilities, and careful coordination to maintain the fiction that I was the beloved aunt, rather than the deceived wife. The office door creaked, and I looked up to see Carlos standing in the doorway, fully dressed, holding a cup of coffee. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that told me he knew exactly what I'd discovered. "You found them," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. The letters were just the beginning, weren't they? My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "This entire office is a shrine to the son you could never publicly acknowledge." Carlos stepped into the room and closed the door behind him, as if Antonia might somehow overhear us from 20 miles away. "Martha, I can explain, 43 years. I interrupted him, gesturing to the folders spread across his desk. 43 years of lying to me, every single day. Making me believe I was the childless wife who got to enjoy being an aunt, when really I was the fool who was helping you raise your son with my sister." He set his coffee cup on the bookshelf and ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd seen thousands of times when he was stressed or uncertain. "It wasn't supposed to happen. The affair, the pregnancy, none of it was planned. But you chose to continue it. You chose to lie to me every day for over 4 decades. You chose to let me love Spencer as my nephew, while you got to be his father in secret." Carlos moved to the window looking out at our garden where I'd spent countless hours teaching Spencer about plants and flowers, never knowing I was sharing knowledge with my husband's son. "Martha, you have to understand. We were protecting you. You've been happy. Spencer has been happy. The arrangement worked for everyone." "Protecting me?" The words came out sharper than I'd intended. "You were protecting yourselves. This elaborate deception wasn't about my happiness. It was about maintaining your perfect setup where you got to have everything you wanted without consequences." "That's not fair," he said, turning back to face me. "You love Spencer. That love is real, regardless of biology. You've been a wonderful mother figure to him. Don't—" I stood up abruptly, the chair rolling backward into the wall. "Don't you dare minimize this by calling me a mother figure. I was never allowed to be his mother because you and Antonia decided I couldn't handle the truth. You made that choice for me, and you've been living with the consequences of that choice ever since." Carlos's face crumpled in a way I'd never seen before. For a moment, he looked every one of his 74 years, the weight of decades of deception finally visible in the lines around his eyes, and the sag of his shoulders. "Martha, please sit down. Let me try to explain how this happened. How we got to this point." "How you got to this point," I corrected. But I did sit down, my legs suddenly feeling unsteady. I was never part of the decision-making process. He moved to the chair across from his desk, the one where Spencer used to sit when he'd visit Carlos's office as a teenager, asking for help with math homework or college applications. Now I understood those sessions differently. They weren't an uncle helping with schoolwork, but a father guiding his son through crucial life decisions. "It started before our wedding," Carlos began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Antonia came home early for the engagement party. Remember? She was supposed to arrive the day before, but her flight was changed and she showed up 3 days early." I remembered. Antonia had surprised us, appearing at our door with her suitcases and that radiant smile, saying she couldn't wait any longer to celebrate our engagement. I'd been thrilled to have extra time with my sister before the chaos of wedding planning intensified. "We were alone in the house while you were at work," Carlos continued. "She was helping me move furniture for the party, and we started talking about marriage, about commitment, about whether people could really promise to love someone forever. She said she'd always wondered what it would be like to be with someone like me, someone stable and reliable, instead of the actors and musicians she usually dated. So you decided to find out," I said flatly. "It wasn't planned, it just happened. One conversation led to another, and then we were kissing, and then—" He trailed off, unable to meet my eyes. Afterward we both agreed it was a mistake, a moment of weakness before my wedding, that wouldn't happen again. But it did happen again. Not right away. We were both careful during the wedding, during the honeymoon.
For the first few months of our marriage, we avoided being alone together. But then you started working those Saturday shifts at the library, and Antonia would visit while you were gone. I closed my eyes, remembering those Saturday afternoons. I'd been so pleased that Carlos and Antonia were developing a friendship, that my new husband was making an effort to connect with my family. When I'd come home from work, they'd often be laughing together over some shared joke, or Carlos would be helping Antonia with her car trouble, or apartment hunting. The pregnancy was an accident, Carlos said quickly, as if that somehow lessened the betrayal. When Antonia told me, we both panicked. She was considering other options. But then she said maybe it was a sign, maybe we were meant to be together. And you said what exactly? Carlos was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. I said I couldn't leave you, that you were good and kind and didn't deserve that kind of betrayal. But I also couldn't abandon my child. So you decided to have it all. Your wife, your mistress, and your secret son. We decided to give the baby a loving family, he said, finally looking at me again. You wanted children, Martha. You'd talked about it, about how much you'd love to be a mother someday. This way, you could be part of Spencer's life without the complications of divorce, custody battles, broken homes. The casual way he discussed my supposed desires, as if he'd been granting me some kind of favor, made my anger flare again. I wanted children with my husband. I wanted an honest marriage and a real family, not to be tricked into helping raise my husband's illegitimate son. Spencer isn't illegitimate, Carlos said sharply. The first real emotion he'd shown since we started talking. He's my son, and he's loved, and he's had a good life because of the choices we made. The choices you made, I corrected again. Without consulting me, without giving me the option to make an informed decision about my own life. Carlos leaned forward in his chair, his expression pleading. Martha, honestly, if we had told you the truth in 1982, what would you have done? Would you have stayed married to me? Would you have welcomed Spencer into our family, knowing he was the product of my affair with your sister? The question hung in the air, between us. I wanted to say yes, that I would have found a way to work through it, that honesty would have been better than decades of lies. But the truth was, I didn't know. At 29, newly married and deeply in love with my husband, learning about his affair with my sister might have destroyed me completely. We'll never know, I said finally. Because you took that choice away from me. You decided I was too fragile, too naive, too something to handle the truth. And you've been making that decision for me every day for 43 years. Haven't you been happy? Carlos asked desperately. Our marriage, our life together, hasn't it been good? Haven't you loved Spencer? Hasn't he brought joy to your life?
Yes, I admitted, the word tasting bitter. But it was all built on a lie. Every moment of happiness was contaminated by your deception. Every time I felt grateful for our life together, you knew it was based on false premises. The love wasn't false, Carlos insisted. Your love for Spencer, his love for you, that's real, Martha. Biology doesn't change the relationships you've built. I stood up again, suddenly needing distance from him. Don't tell me what's real in my own life. You've already taken enough from me. I walked past Carlos and out of his office, my mind racing with a clarity that surprised me. The initial shock and pain were crystallizing into something harder, more purposeful. I had decisions to make, and for the first time in 43 years, I was going to make them based on complete information. Carlos followed me to the kitchen, where I poured myself a cup of coffee with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be. Martha, we need to talk about this. We need to figure out how to move forward. I turned to face him, noting how small he looked in our bright, cheerful kitchen. There is no we anymore, Carlos. There hasn't been for 43 years. There's been you and Antonia making decisions about my life while I lived in ignorance. He flinched at the harshness in my voice. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, I said honestly. But I'm going to figure it out without input from you or my sister. You've both forfeited the right to have opinions about my choices. The phone rang then, its cheerful tone jarring in the tense atmosphere. I glanced at the caller ID and felt my stomach clench. Antonia. Don't answer it, Carlos said quickly. I picked up the phone.
Hello, Antonia. Martha. I was just calling to confirm Sunday dinner. Spencer and Mabel want to bring the new baby pictures from their photo shoot. You're going to love them. Little Emma looks just like Spencer did at 3 months. The casual normalcy of her voice, the easy assumption that our weekly family dinner would proceed as always, made something snap inside me. Actually, Antonia, I need to talk to you. Can you come over this morning? There was a pause. Is everything okay? You sound strange. Just come over. We need to discuss some family matters. Well, I was planning to grocery shop this morning, but I suppose I could. Now, Antonia. Another pause, longer this time. All right, I'll be there in 20 minutes. I hung up and turned to Carlos, who was staring at me with something approaching fear. Martha, what are you planning? I'm planning to have an honest conversation with my sister for the first time in 4 decades, I said. You can stay or go, but you're not participating in the decision-making anymore. Don't destroy Spencer's life because you're angry with us, Carlos said desperately. He doesn't deserve to be hurt by this. The audacity of that statement, that I was the one who might hurt Spencer, left me momentarily speechless. Spencer's life was built on a lie that you and Antonia created. If anyone destroyed it, you did, the day you decided to deceive him about his parentage. He's happy, Carlos insisted. He has a good marriage, a new baby, a successful career. Why would you want to take that away from him? I don't want to take anything away from Spencer, but he deserves to know who his father is, and I deserve to know my place in his life. Those aren't unreasonable things to want. Carlos slumped against the kitchen counter. If you tell him the truth, it changes everything. His relationship with me, with you, with Antonia, his understanding of his own history. Yes, I agreed. It does change everything. Just like it changed everything for me yesterday, when I found those letters. The difference is, Spencer will get to choose how to respond to the truth, instead of having 42 years of his life built on a lie. I heard Antonia's car in the driveway, the slam of her door, her footsteps on our front porch. She used her key to let herself in, calling out as she always did. Martha, Carlos, where is everyone? Kitchen, I called back, my voice surprisingly steady. Antonia appeared in the doorway, looking effortlessly put together despite the early hour. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, her makeup subtle but perfect, her casual clothes expensive and well-fitted. At 68, she was still beautiful, still the kind of woman who drew attention wherever she went. What's this about? She asked, glancing between Carlos and me. You both look like someone died. In a way someone did, I said. The person I thought I was, the marriage I thought I had, the family I thought we were. Antonia's expression shifted, wariness replacing her casual confidence. Her eyes moved to Carlos, who was staring at the floor, then back to me. Martha, what are you talking about? Instead of answering, I walked to the counter where I'd left the shoebox the night before, hidden behind the coffee maker. I set it on the kitchen table and removed the lid. I found these yesterday, while cleaning the attic, I said, pulling out a handful of letters. 43 years of correspondence between my husband and my sister. 43 years of love letters documenting an affair that started before my wedding and never ended. Antonia went very still, her face draining of color. Martha, I can explain, I'm sure you can. You and Carlos have become very good at explanations over the years. But before you start, there's something else. I pulled out one of the photographs, the one of Carlos teaching young Spencer to fish. I also know that Spencer isn't your son with some mysterious actor who disappeared. He's your son with my husband. My nephew is actually my husband's child. Antonia sank into one of the kitchen chairs as if her legs could no longer support her. For the first time since I'd known her, my confident, beautiful sister looked truly defeated. How long have you known? She whispered. Since yesterday afternoon. But you've both known for 42 years. Antonia stared at the photographs scattered across my kitchen table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When she looked up at me, her eyes were filled with tears I'd rarely seen from my composed, controlled sister. Martha, you have to understand, we never meant for it to go on this long. It was supposed to be temporary, just until we could figure out the right way to handle everything. 43 years is a hell of a long time to figure something out, I said, settling into the chair across from her. Carlos remained standing by the counter, as if sitting down would make him too much of a participant in this conversation. We were young, Antonia continued, her voice taking on the persuasive tone. I remembered from childhood when she was trying to talk her way out of trouble. I was 25. Carlos was 31. We made a mistake, and then we compounded it by trying to protect everyone involved. Protect everyone except me, apparently. I'm the only one who wasn't allowed to make informed decisions about my own life. Antonia reached across the table, trying to take my hand. I pulled it away. Martha, if we had told you the truth back then, what would have happened? Your marriage would have ended before it really began. Spencer would have grown up in a broken home. You would have lost both your husband and your sister. I lost them anyway, I said quietly. I just didn't know it. No, you didn't. We've all been here, loving you, building a life with you, building a lie with me, I corrected. Every family dinner, every holiday, every milestone in Spencer's life, it was all theater. You and Carlos playing your roles while I remained the only person in the dark. Carlos finally spoke from his position by the counter. Antonia, maybe we should tell her about the discussions we've had over the years, about the times we almost came clean. I turned to look at him. Oh, please do tell me about your discussions. I'd love to hear how many times you two almost decided to treat me like an adult capable of handling reality. Antonia shot Carlos a warning look, but it was too late. There were several times, she admitted reluctantly. When Spencer graduated high school, we talked about telling both of you the truth before he went to college. When he got engaged, we thought maybe it was time, and when little Emma was born last month, you discussed telling me that my granddaughter is actually my step-granddaughter. How thoughtful. She's not your step-granddaughter, Antonia said fiercely. Emma is your family, just like Spencer has always been your family. Biology doesn't change love, Martha. Stop telling me what changes love and what doesn't, I snapped. You have no authority to define my relationships for me. You've already stolen 43 years of authentic connection from me. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the kitchen clock. I could see both Carlos and Antonia struggling with what to say next, how to navigate this conversation that they'd probably rehearsed in their minds countless times over the decades. What do you want from us? Antonia finally asked. What would make this right? Nothing can make this right, I said. But what happens next isn't about you two anymore. It's about Spencer, and what he deserves to know about his own life. Carlos stepped forward, his face pale. Martha, Spencer is happy. He's got a new baby, a wife he adores, a career he's worked hard for. Why would you want to upend all of that? Because he deserves to know who his father is. Because he deserves to make his own decisions about his relationships based on truth instead of fiction. Because his daughter deserves to know her real family medical history. Antonia was shaking her head. Spencer has never asked questions about his biological father. He seems content with the story we told him. The story you told him when he was too young to understand the implications. He's a 42-year-old man now with a family of his own. Don't you think he's old enough to handle the truth? What if it destroys him? Carlos asked. What if learning that his uncle is actually his father ruins his relationship with all of us? That's his choice to make, I said firmly. Just like it should have been my choice to make 43 years ago. I stood up and began gathering the letters back into the shoebox. Here's what's going to happen. We're having Sunday dinner as planned, with Spencer and Mabel and the baby. But this Sunday, we're going to tell him the truth. Martha, no, Antonia gasped. You can't just spring this on him in front of his wife and child. Fine. Then we'll ask Mabel to stay home with Emma. But Spencer is going to learn the truth this Sunday, and he's going to learn it from all three of us together. No more secrets, no more lies, no more decisions made about his life without his knowledge. Carlos and Antonia exchanged a look that held decades of shared secrets and coordinated deception. And if we refuse? Carlos asked quietly. Then I'll tell him myself. But I think he deserves to hear it from both his parents, don't you? The word parents hung in the air,
finally spoken aloud after 42 years of careful avoidance. Antonia began crying in earnest then, quiet tears that she didn't try to hide or excuse. "We thought we were protecting him," she whispered. "We thought we were protecting you. You were protecting yourselves," I said. "And your comfort comes to an end this Sunday." The days between that kitchen confrontation and Sunday dinner passed in a strange suspended animation. Carlos moved through the house like a ghost, speaking only when necessary, his usual cheerful routine replaced by careful, nervous silence. He'd tried twice to bring up the subject of what we would tell Spencer, how we would frame the revelation, but I'd shut him down both times. "You've had 43 years to figure out how to tell the truth," I'd said. "Don't ask me to help you script it now." I spent those days in my own form of preparation, though I wasn't entirely sure what I was preparing for. I found myself looking through photo albums, studying pictures of Spencer throughout his childhood and adolescence with new eyes. There he was at age 5, missing his front teeth, sitting on Carlos's shoulders at a 4th of July parade. At 12, proudly holding up a fish he'd caught during one of our family camping trips, Carlos's arm around his shoulder. At 18, in his graduation cap and gown, standing between Carlos and me while Antonia took the picture. In every photo, the resemblance was obvious now that I knew to look for it. Not just the physical similarities, but the expressions, the body language, the way they both tilted their heads when concentrating on something. How had I missed it? How had anyone missed it? But then I remembered, no one had been looking for it. In a world where Spencer was Antonia's son with an absent father, Carlos's natural affinity with the boy had been seen as kindness rather than paternity. Their easy relationship had been admired rather than questioned. On Friday evening, Spencer called to confirm Sunday dinner, as he did every week. Usually Carlos or I would answer, have a brief chat about work or the baby, and confirm the time and any dishes we might be preparing. This time, I picked up the phone with hands that trembled slightly. "Hi, Aunt Martha." Spencer's voice was warm and familiar, filled with the same affection it had carried since he was old enough to speak my name. "Just checking in about Sunday. Mabel's making that cranberry salad you like, and we're excited to show you the new photos of Emma." "Spencer," I said, my voice catching slightly on his name. "Actually, I wanted to ask, would it be possible for you to come alone this Sunday, without Mabel and the baby?" There was a pause. "Is everything okay? That's unusual." I closed my eyes, searching for the right words. "There are some family matters we need to discuss. Adult matters. Nothing bad," I added quickly, though I wasn't sure that was true. "Just some things that have come up that we think you should know about." "What kind of things?" Spencer's voice had shifted from casual to concerned. "Aunt Martha, you're starting to worry me. Is someone sick? Are you and Uncle Carlos having problems?" The innocent directness of his questions, the assumption that Carlos was his uncle, that I was his aunt, that whatever problems might exist would be normal family concerns, made my throat tighten with emotion. "We're all fine," I managed. "It's just, there are some things about our family history that we haven't talked about before. Things you have a right to know now that you're an adult with a family of your own." Another pause, longer this time. "This is about my biological father, isn't it?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the phone tighter, looking across the kitchen to where Carlos was pretending to read the newspaper, while obviously listening to every word. "What makes you ask that?" I said carefully. Spencer laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Aunt Martha, I'm 42 years old. I've been married for 5 years. I have a daughter. Did you really think I'd never wonder about the fact that no one has ever been able to tell me anything concrete about my father beyond he was an actor, who left when he found out about the pregnancy?" I felt the blood drain from my face. "Spencer, I've wondered for years why Mom gets so uncomfortable whenever I ask about him. Why there are no photos, no stories, no details that any woman would remember about a man she was supposedly in love with. And lately, especially since Emma was born and we've been talking about family medical history," he trailed off, and I could hear him taking a deep breath. "I've actually been thinking about hiring a private investigator. Mabel thinks I should just let it go, but I want Emma to know her grandfather's medical history, at least."
I was going to talk to you and Uncle Carlos about it on Sunday, see if you thought it was a good idea. The irony was overwhelming. Spencer had been planning to ask for our help in uncovering the truth we'd been hiding from him his entire life. Don't hire a private investigator, I said quietly. Come to dinner on Sunday, alone. We'll tell you everything you want to know. Everything? Spencer's voice was sharp with hope and apprehension. You know who he is? You've known all along? I looked at Carlos, who had abandoned any pretense of reading, and was staring at me with wide, frightened eyes. Yes, Spencer, we know who your father is. We've always known. Why didn't you tell me before? Why the secrecy? That's what we need to discuss on Sunday. In person, all of us together. All of us, Mom, too. Yes, your mother will be here. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Spencer spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. Aunt Martha, is my father someone I know? My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it through the phone. Sunday, Spencer. We'll explain everything on Sunday. Okay, he said finally. Okay, I'll come alone. What time? 2 o'clock. Same as always. Same as always, he repeated. And there was something in his tone that suggested he understood that after Sunday, nothing would be the same as always ever again. After I hung up, Carlos and I stood in our kitchen, looking at each other across the space that had once felt comfortable and familiar, but now seemed charged with tension and impending change. He already suspects, Carlos said quietly. Yes, I agreed. He does. Which makes me wonder what took him so long, and what that says about how much he trusted the adults in his life to tell him the truth. Carlos flinched at the implication. Martha, there's still time to reconsider this. We could tell him something else, give him some story that satisfies his curiosity without no, I said firmly. No more lies, no more protecting your comfort at the expense of his right to know his own history. Sunday he learns the truth. Sunday arrived with unseasonably warm weather for October in Salem. I'd been awake since dawn, moving restlessly through the house, checking and rechecking the dinner preparations that had become automatic after decades of Sunday family meals. The roast was in the oven, the table was set with our good china, and everything looked exactly as it always did for these gatherings, except nothing would ever be the same again. Antonia arrived at 1:30, 30 minutes early, looking as if she hadn't slept in days. Her usually perfect appearance was slightly disheveled, hair not quite as styled as usual, makeup that couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes. I keep thinking this is a mistake, she said, without preamble as I let her in. Spencer is happy. His life is good. Why are we about to destroy that? We're not destroying anything, I replied, though I wasn't entirely convinced of that myself. We're finally telling him the truth he's been searching for. Carlos emerged from his office, where he'd been pacing for the better part of the morning. The three of us stood in our living room, looking at each other like strangers, despite the decades of shared history between us.
What exactly are we going to say? Antonia asked. How do you tell someone that everything they've believed about their family is a lie? You start with the truth, I said. You tell him that you and Carlos have been having an affair since before my wedding, that he's Carlos's son, and that you've all been lying to him about it for 42 years. The bluntness of my words made them both flinch. Carlos ran his hands through his hair in that familiar gesture of stress. Martha, maybe we could find a gentler way to. There is no gentle way to tell someone their entire life has been built on deception, I interrupted. At exactly 2 o'clock we heard Spencer's car in the driveway. I watched through the window as he sat in his car for a moment before getting out, as if gathering his courage. He walked to our front door with the slow, deliberate steps of someone who knew they were about to learn something that would change everything. I opened the door before he could knock. Hi, Spencer. Aunt Martha. He hugged me and I found myself memorizing the feeling, wondering if it would be the last time he'd embrace me with such uncomplicated affection. Where is everyone? In the living room. Come on. Spencer followed me through the house, and I could feel his tension increasing with each step. When we entered the living room, he looked between Carlos and Antonia, his expression shifting from curiosity to something approaching apprehension. Okay, he said, settling into the chair he'd occupied for countless family discussions over the years. What's this about?
And please don't tell me someone's dying, because the suspense is killing me. Carlos and Antonia looked at me, as if expecting me to lead this conversation. I realized that even now, even in this moment of supposed truth-telling, they were still trying to manage the situation, still hoping I would somehow make this easier for them. Spencer, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, we need to tell you about your father. His entire body went still. You know who he is. Yes, I said. We've always known. And Spencer, he's someone you know too. Spencer's eyes moved between the three of us, and I watched as understanding began to dawn on his face. His gaze lingered on Carlos, taking in the familiar features they shared, the mannerisms he'd inherited, the connection that had always been there but never acknowledged. No, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. No, that can't be. Carlos stepped forward, his hands trembling. Spencer, son, don't call me that. Spencer shot to his feet, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Don't you dare call me that. Not now. Not like this. The pain in his voice cut through me like a knife. This was what I had feared, what Carlos and Antonia had spent 42 years trying to prevent. But it was also what Spencer deserved. The truth, however devastating it might be. Spencer, please sit down, Antonia said, reaching toward him. Let us explain. Explain what? His voice cracked with emotion. Explain how you've been lying to me my entire life. Explain how my uncle is actually my father. Explain how my aunt. He turned to look at me, his eyes filled with a confusion that broke my heart. What does this make you, Martha? What are you to me? I don't know, I admitted honestly. I'm still figuring that out myself. I only learned the truth 3 days ago. Spencer stared at me. You didn't know? No. I found letters in the attic while cleaning. 43 years of correspondence between your mother and my husband. That's how I learned that my marriage was a lie, and that my nephew was actually my husband's son. Spencer sank back into his chair, as if his legs could no longer support him. My God, this is, how long have you two been? He gestured between Carlos and Antonia. Since before Martha's wedding, Antonia said quietly. It started as a mistake, and then it became complicated. Spencer's laugh was bitter. That's what you call a 43-year affair. Complicated. Carlos moved closer, his expression desperate. Spencer, I know this is a shock, but I need you to understand. I've always been your father. I may not have been able to claim you publicly, but I've been there for every important moment of your life. Your first steps, your first day of school, teaching you to drive, helping you with college applications. As my uncle, Spencer exploded. You were there as my uncle. Every birthday card you signed, Uncle Carlos, every Christmas gift labeled, from Uncle Carlos and Aunt Martha. Every time I called you Uncle Carlos, you let me live a lie. We thought it was better this way, Antonia said, tears streaming down her face. We thought you'd be happier with a stable family structure than with the truth about how complicated everything really was. You thought. Spencer stood again, pacing to the window. You thought I'd be happier living a lie. You thought I wouldn't notice that I look exactly like the man I called my uncle. You thought I wouldn't wonder why my uncle cared more about my life than most fathers care about their own children. He turned back to face us, and I could see decades of small questions and unspoken doubts finally crystallizing into understanding. All those times people commented on how much I looked like Uncle Carlos. All those times you got that weird expression when I asked about my biological father. All those times I felt like there was something you weren't telling me. I was right, wasn't I? There was always something you weren't telling me. The room fell silent except for the sound of Antonia's quiet sobbing. Carlos looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past 10 minutes. And Spencer stood by our window, looking out at the garden where he'd played as a child, where he'd learned to ride a bike, where he'd had countless conversations with the man he now knew was his father. Spencer remained at the window for what felt like an eternity, his back to us, his shoulders rigid with tension. When he finally spoke, his voice was eerily calm. Emma, he said without turning around. My daughter, what is she to Martha? The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode.
I realized that in all our discussions about how to tell Spencer the truth, we'd never fully considered how this revelation would ripple through to the next generation.
She's, I began, then stopped. What was Emma to me? If Spencer was Carlos's son, then Emma was Carlos's granddaughter. But what did that make me? I suppose she's your father's granddaughter, I said finally. Spencer turned around slowly, his face a mask of controlled fury. She's my father's granddaughter. Not my uncle's great-niece. My father's granddaughter. He looked directly at Carlos. Do you understand what you've stolen from me? From my wife? From my daughter? Carlos took a step forward. Spencer, I never meant to steal anything. You stole the right to call you Dad, Spencer interrupted. You stole the right to introduce you to Mabel as my father instead of my uncle. You stole the right to have Emma know her real grandfather. His voice broke. Do you know what it was like growing up, thinking my father was some deadbeat actor who abandoned me? Do you know how many times I wondered if I had his worst qualities, if I'd abandoned my own family the way he abandoned me? Antonia stood up, reaching toward her son. Spencer, honey, you have to understand. Don't. Spencer held up his hand, stopping her mid-sentence. Don't call me honey. Don't use any of those casual endearments that make this sound like a normal family conversation. Nothing about this is normal. He moved to the center of the room, looking at each of us in turn. I need to understand the scope of this. How many people knew? No one else, Antonia said quickly. Just the three of us. The three of us. Spencer's laugh was bitter. Martha didn't know until 3 days ago. So it was just you two, living this elaborate lie, making decisions about my life, about her life, about everyone's life, based on your need to keep your affair secret. He turned to me, his expression softer but still wounded. Martha, I need to know, what are you going to do now? Are you staying married to him? Are you going to keep pretending this is a normal family? The question forced me to confront the decision I'd been avoiding for 3 days. I don't know, Spencer. I'm still processing all of this myself. But you're not going to keep living the lie? No, I said firmly. No more lies. Whatever happens next, it's going to be based on truth. Spencer nodded, then looked at Carlos and Antonia. I need time. I need to figure out how to tell my wife that her father-in-law isn't who she thinks he is. I need to figure out how to explain to my daughter that her family tree just got completely rewritten. I need to figure out if I can ever trust either of you again. Spencer, Carlos said desperately, please don't let this destroy our relationship. I love you. That's never been a lie. But everything else has been, Spencer replied. Every conversation we've had about family, about fathers, about being a man, all of it was contaminated by this secret you were keeping from me. He moved toward the door, then stopped. I won't be coming to Sunday dinners for a while. I need space to figure out who I am now that I know my entire life story was fiction. How long? Antonia asked, her voice barely audible. Spencer looked at her with eyes that held decades of love, mixed with fresh betrayal. I don't know, Mom. I honestly don't know. After Spencer left, the three of us stood in our living room like survivors of some natural disaster, surveying the wreckage of what had once been our family. The dinner I'd prepared sat untouched in the kitchen, the table still set with our good china, as if we were expecting guests who would never arrive. Antonia was the first to break the silence. I should go, she said, gathering her purse with hands that shook. I don't know what I need to do. Antonia, Carlos started, but she cut him off. Just don't. I can't deal with you right now on top of everything else. She looked at me, her eyes red with tears. Martha, I know you probably hate me. I don't hate you, I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. I'm angry, I'm hurt, I'm betrayed. But I don't hate you. You're still my sister. Am I? She asked. After what I've done to you, to your marriage, to Spencer, am I still your sister? I considered the question seriously. I don't know what we are to each other anymore. But we share 43 years of history that can't be erased, even if most of it was built on lies. Antonia nodded, tears flowing freely now. I never meant for it to go on this long. In the beginning, we kept telling ourselves we'd find the right time to tell the truth. But the longer it went on, the harder it became. And Spencer was so happy, and you seemed happy, and it felt cruel to destroy that just to ease our consciences. You weren't protecting us, I said quietly. You were protecting yourselves. There's a difference. She flinched but didn't argue. What happens now? I don't know. I need time to figure out what my life looks like when it's not built on a foundation of lies. After Antonia left, Carlos and I faced each other across the living room that had been the scene of countless family gatherings, holiday celebrations, and quiet Sunday afternoons. It looked exactly the same, but everything had changed. Martha, he began, I know this seems impossible to forgive, but our marriage, what we've built together, that wasn't all a lie, wasn't it? I sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. Every day for 43 years, you woke up knowing something about our family that you were hiding from me. Every interaction with Spencer was colored by the knowledge that he was your son, not just your nephew. Every conversation with Antonia carried the weight of your shared secret. Carlos sat in his chair, the same chair where Spencer had learned the truth just hours earlier. The love wasn't a lie. My feelings for you are life together. The good times we've shared, those were real. But they were built on deception. How can I trust my memories when I know you were lying to me during all of them? What are you saying? I looked at this man I'd shared a bed with for over 4 decades. This man who had been my companion, my friend, my partner in everything except honesty. I'm saying I can't stay married to you. Carlos' face went pale. Martha, please, don't let one mistake destroy 43 years of marriage. One mistake. I stood up, anger giving me energy. Carlos, this wasn't one mistake. This was thousands of deliberate choices, every single day, to lie to me, to deceive me, to let me live in ignorance while you and my sister conducted your real lives in secret. Where will you go? What will you do? I don't know yet. But I know I can't stay here, pretending this is still a home, still a marriage, still a life I recognize. He was crying now, something I'd rarely seen in all our years together. Martha, I love you. I've always loved you. Maybe you have. But you've loved your secret more. I'm sitting in the sunroom of my new apartment, a cozy 2-bedroom place downtown Salem that overlooks the river. It's the first home I've ever chosen entirely for myself, and every morning when I wake up here, I'm reminded that my life finally belongs to me. The divorce was finalized 3 weeks ago. Carlos kept the house, fitting, since it was never really mine anyway, just another stage for his elaborate performance. I took half our savings and my dignity, which turned out to be more valuable than I'd expected. Spencer and I meet for coffee every Thursday now. It took him 4 months to call me after that devastating Sunday dinner, and our first conversation was awkward, full of careful questions about what our relationship could look like going forward. But slowly, we're building something new, something honest. Last week, he brought Emma to visit my apartment. She's walking now, and she spent an hour pulling books off my shelves while Spencer and I talked about everything and nothing. When she called me Gamma Martha, it didn't matter anymore whether I was technically her great aunt or step-grandmother. Love doesn't require proper titles. Spencer's relationship with Carlos is more complicated. They're trying, meeting for lunch once a month, but there's a formality there now that never existed before. The easy familiarity of uncle and nephew has been replaced by the careful politeness of a father and son who are still learning how to be honest with each other. Antonia and I exchange Christmas cards. That's about the extent of our relationship now, and maybe that's enough. Some betrayals create too much scar tissue for full healing, but we've found a way to coexist in the same family ecosystem without destroying each other. Carlos calls sometimes, always with some practical matter about the divorce settlement, or a question about which photographs I want from our shared albums. But sometimes he calls just to hear my voice, to tell me he misses me, to ask if I'm happy. The answer to that last question surprises me every time I give it. Yes, I tell him, I'm happy. At 71, I've discovered that happiness doesn't require a perfect family or a flawless marriage or a life without secrets. It just requires truth, choices made with full information, and the courage to start over when the foundation you've built your life on turns out to be quicksand. The best part? Every day now is exactly what it appears to be. No hidden meanings, no secret agendas, no lies dressed up as love. Just the truth, and me, and the rest of my life stretching ahead like an unwritten story.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.